Hey there. Today we're diving into a story uh, that might just redefine your image of underdog struggles.
Okay.
The tale of Vercingetorix.
Hmm.
You've probably heard the name.
Right.
But we're going beyond the surface level, exploring his leadership in the Gallic resistance against Julius Caesar. And just to make things even more interesting, we're focusing on those intriguing details that often get overlooked.
Yeah.
Our guide for this deep dive is Vercingetorix's very own Wikipedia page.
It's amazing how much information gets packed into those pages.
Right.
Yeah, we might uncover insights you wouldn't expect.
Okay, let's unpack this. Vercingetorix, he wasn't just some random guy who decided to pick a fight with Rome, was he?
Not at all. He was Arverni royalty, a prince born into a position of power. But what's fascinating is how he leveraged that influence to unite almost all the Gallic tribes against Caesar. You have to remember, these tribes weren't exactly known for playing nicely with each other.
Right.
Vercingetorix managed to overcome those historical divisions, forging a united front against a common enemy.
It makes you wonder what kind of leader he was to achieve that. This wasn't just about military strategy. This was about diplomacy and persuasion on a massive scale.
Absolutely, and his strategies were anything but conventional. Think
Totally.
about the scorched earth policy he implemented. I mean, imagine the sheer determination it would take to convince your people to burn their own land, their homes, their crops, all to cripple the enemy's supply lines.
Yeah. It's a tactic that raises a lot of questions. Was it truly effective?
Yeah.
What kind of toll did it take on the Gaelic people themselves? It speaks volumes about the level of trust Vercingetorix inspired, doesn't it?
Hmm.
He must have had incredible charisma and conviction to get people on board with such a drastic plan. But there was one exception to this scorched earth policy, wasn't there? The fortified city of Avaricum.
Huh?
Why was it spared?
That's where the historical debate gets interesting. Some historians believe the Gauls saw Avaricum as a potential trap for Caesar, hoping to lure his legions into a costly siege. Others suggest its preservation might have had more to do with internal Gallic politics and conflicting tribal interests. It's a reminder that even within this supposed united Gaul, there were still underlying tensions and power struggles.
So even with Vercingetorix at the helm, there were limitations to his control compromises he had to make. It adds a whole new dimension to his leadership, doesn't it? Trying to balance military strategy with internal politics.
Right.
Talk about pressure. But ultimately, Avaricum fell to Caesar, didn't it? What was the impact of that loss?
The fall of Avaricum was devastating. We have to remember, though, that the historical accounts we have, particularly those from Caesar himself, are likely biased. Caesar claimed a massacre with very few survivors. It's impossible to know the exact truth, but it's clear that the loss was significant both in terms of human life and morale.
Such a brutal event and probably a strategic setback, too. But you said earlier that even after this loss, Vercingetorix's influence didn't dwindle. In fact, it seemed to grow stronger. How could that be?
It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But maybe the Gauls saw in his willingness to make such a difficult gamble, even in defeat, a leader truly committed to their cause. Maybe they felt they had no other choice but to unite even more firmly under his banner. Or perhaps, in the face of such brutality, they clung to the hope he represented. It's a testament to his ability to adapt, to find a way to rally his people, even when facing setbacks.
And rally them he did, because shortly after Avaricum, we have the Battle of Gergovia, surprising Gallic victory, right? A glimmer of hope in this desperate fight for freedom. Tell me about this Gergovia triumph. What made it such a turning point?
Gergovia was a natural fortress perfectly suited for Vercingetorix's style of warfare. He drew Caesar's forces into attacking uphill, a classic blunder. The terrain itself became a weapon, leading to a significant Roman defeat.
So they turned the tables on Caesar, using his overconfidence against him.
Exactly.
It must have been a huge morale boost for the Gauls, proof that Caesar wasn't invincible after all.
Absolutely. And that victory resonated far beyond the battlefield. It attracted more tribes to Vercingetorix's cause, proving he could actually win against Rome. Imagine the energy, the sense of possibility that must have surged through the Gallic ranks after such a win.
Speaking of energy, I'm getting the feeling that this high point doesn't last forever. The final showdown is on the horizon, isn't it?
Yeah.
Alesia.
Alesia. It's a name that echoes with the weight of history, isn't it? This strategically vital city became the focal point of the entire conflict. Vercingetorix knew Caesar would come for him, so he made Alesia his stronghold. But Caesar, in his relentless pursuit, laid siege to the city, trapping Vercingetorix and his forces inside.
So the hunter becomes the hunted. We've seen Vercingetorix's strategic brilliance throughout this campaign. It's hard to imagine he didn't anticipate this possibility. Did he have a plan B?
He did, and it was a bold one. Vercingetorix had already sent out a call for reinforcements, a desperate plea for a united Gallic front, and his call was answered. A massive relief force converged on Alesia, threatening to crush Caesar and his legions between the besieged city and this new overwhelming force.
Wow, talk about a high-stakes gamble. Vercingetorix essentially forced Caesar to fight a war on two fronts. I can't even imagine the logistical nightmare that must have been for the Romans.
It was a nightmare, but Caesar, ever the strategist, rose to the challenge. What he did next is considered one of the most impressive feats of military engineering in ancient history. He built two sets of fortifications, one facing inward trapping Vercingetorix within Alesia, and another facing outward to defend against the relief army.
Two sets of walls. That's insane. It must have been an absolutely massive undertaking requiring incredible resources and manpower. It almost sounds like something out of a fantasy novel.
It does, doesn't it? But this was reality, and it speaks to the sheer determination of both sides. For the Romans, it was a display of their engineering prowess and logistical capabilities. For the Gauls, both inside and outside Alesia, it was a desperate fight for survival for freedom. The very fate of Gaul hung in the balance.
Okay, so we have this incredible standoff. Caesar's legions are trapped between a rock and a hard place, facing attacks from both within Alesia and from the Gallic relief force. What happened next? Were the Romans able to hold their ground?
Despite being outnumbered and under constant pressure, the Romans under Caesar's command managed to hold their lines. Those fortifications proved to be their salvation. The Gauls fought bravely, launching wave after wave of attacks, but they couldn't break through. And inside Alesia, with supplies dwindling and hope fading, Vercingetorix faced an impossible choice.
Knowing Vercingetorix's story so far, I imagine surrendering wasn't an option he considered lightly. What happened?
He chose to surrender to Caesar, not for himself, but to save his people from further bloodshed. He rode out of Alesia alone in full battle regalia and offered himself to Caesar.
What a powerful image. A warrior king laying down his arms to protect his people. It's a heartbreaking end to such a fierce struggle, but there's a certain nobility in his actions, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It was a selfless act, putting the well-being of his people above his own ambitions, his own survival. But his surrender marked the end of Gallic independence. And for Vercingetorix, a long and agonizing road lay ahead.
A road that led to Rome, I presume. What fate awaited him there?
A fate shared by many defeated leaders in the ancient world. A public humiliation designed to showcase Roman dominance. He was paraded through the streets of Rome during Caesar's triumph, a captive symbol of Gaul's fall. After years of imprisonment, he was executed.
It's hard to grasp the full weight of such a fate. Years of imprisonment, knowing your death is inevitable, and then that final public humiliation. It makes you think about the human cost of war, the enduring impact on those who fight and lose.
It does. But what's remarkable is how Vercingetorix's story didn't end there. In a way, his death was just the beginning of his legacy.
His legacy. But he was a defeated leader, a symbol of Roman victory. How did that transform into a legacy?
Over time, perceptions shifted. From a historical footnote, Vercingetorix became a national hero in France.
That's incredible. A defeated enemy centuries later becoming a symbol of national pride. How did that happen? What sparked this dramatic shift in perception?
Well, for one thing, there's the inherent power of his story. A warrior prince who united a fractured people who fought valiantly against a seemingly invincible empire and who ultimately sacrificed himself for the greater good. It's a narrative that resonates across cultures and across time. It speaks to the human desire for freedom, for self-determination.
So there's the man himself, the story itself, but there must be more to it than that. What role did France play in shaping Vercingetorix's legacy?
As France developed its own national identity, it sought heroes figures who embodied its values and aspirations. Vercingetorix fit the bill perfectly. He became a symbol of resistance against foreign domination, a rallying point for French patriotism.
It's fascinating how history can be reinterpreted, how figures can be reclaimed and redefined to fit the needs of later generations. And it makes me think about those statues of Vercingetorix, particularly the ones depicting him with a winged helmet. I know it's not historically accurate, but it's such a striking image. It makes you wonder if sometimes the legend becomes more powerful than the reality. It does make you wonder. That winged helmet, it's almost become a symbol of Vercingetorix himself, even though it's a later addition and embellishment of the historical record. It's like with any good story, the legend often takes on a life of its own.
It's true, and there are other examples of how Vercingetorix's image has been shaped over time. In some accounts, his leadership is presented as absolute, as if he were the sole voice of the Gallic resistance. But the reality, as we've discussed, was much more complex.
Right, Gaul wasn't this perfectly unified entity. There were divisions, rivalries, even tribes that sided with the Romans. It makes you appreciate the challenges Vercingetorix faced trying to forge a common cause out of such a diverse and often fractious population. It adds another layer to his leadership, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And his military victories, while significant, were often exaggerated in later retellings, creating a more heroic, almost mythical figure. It's the classic tendency to romanticize the past, to smooth over the rough edges, and create a narrative that fits our own preconceived notions.
We crave those clear-cut heroes and villains, those epic battles between good and evil. But history rarely fits neatly into those boxes. It's messy, it's complicated, and it's full of contradictions. And to really understand a figure like Vercingetorix, we have to embrace that complexity, dig beneath the surface of the legend, and grapple with the nuances of the historical evidence.
Precisely. And even then, we have to be mindful of our own biases, our own interpretations. The sources we have, even those written by contemporaries like Caesar, are filtered through their own perspectives, their own agendas. It's like piecing together a puzzle with missing pieces, knowing that we'll never have the complete picture.
But that's part of what makes history so compelling, isn't it?
Yeah.
The constant search for understanding, the recognition that our knowledge is always evolving. We're not just passively absorbing facts, we're actively engaging with the past, questioning, interpreting, and drawing our own conclusions. And in case of Vercingetorix, those conclusions can vary widely. Was he a brilliant strategist who almost single-handedly held off the might of Rome? Or was he a product of circumstance elevated to a heroic status that doesn't quite match the historical reality? Maybe it's a bit of both.
I think you've hit on a key point there. It's not about choosing one interpretation over another, but about acknowledging the multiplicity of perspectives, the shades of gray that make history so fascinating.
And at the end of the day, regardless of where you fall on that spectrum of interpretation, there's no denying the impact of Vercingetorix's story. He represents a pivotal moment in history, the clash between a rising empire and those who dared to resist its expansion. He embodies the struggle for freedom, the courage to stand up against overwhelming odds. And his legacy continues to inspire, to challenge us to think critically about the past and its influence on the present.
Well said, and I think that's a perfect note on which to wrap up this deep dive. Vercingetorix's story, both the historical reality and the enduring legend, offers a powerful reminder that history is more than just dates and battles. It's about people, their choices, their struggles, and their legacies. It's about the enduring human spirit, the desire for freedom, and the willingness to fight for what you believe in, even in the face of overwhelming odds.
And it's a reminder that history is never truly finished. It's a conversation that continues across generations, inviting us to re-examine the past, to question our assumptions, and to find new meaning in the stories that shape who we are. So for all of you listening, I encourage you to keep digging, keep questioning, and keep exploring the complexities of the past. The journey is just as rewarding as the destination. And until next time, this has been The Deep Dive.
Thank you for listening. If you love history, don't forget to subscribe to History with Bree and Peter. Join us for more fascinating stories from the past. Hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode.